What's up everybody, it's Brady from Garage North. Today we're going to do a video here on how to change your pivot shaft seal on a Mazda Speed 3. Now you'll notice if you have a high kilometer Mazda Speed 3 that your seal is gone, you're going to get oil all over the engine bay of your car. I'll show you here in a minute when I get everything apart, just to see what kind of damage you've done with leaving this seal to just leak all over your car. It's terrible. It's just not a good scene for anybody. So if you've got a Mazda Speed 3 or even a Mazda 3 manual transmission that you're noticing a little bit more sloppy, it's definitely time to change your seal in your pivot shaft. So before we get started here, I'll just give you a quick showdown of where exactly we're going to be working in the area today and what things we have to take apart. You notice right here I've got my short ram intake here, and below it I've already got a short shifter plate installed from JBR, but this right here is your pivot shaft, and you can kind of see already where all the oil is built up here from where the seal is leaking. Now this is just the boot. A lot of people think that the boot is what the problem is, but really it's the seal that's within the pivot shaft assembly here. So we're going to take this whole assembly out, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Okay guys, so the first thing I'm going to do here is remove my short ram intake. First I got to disconnect it from just under the battery here where it bolts to the engine bay, and take off my sensor here, and then I'm actually going to remove it from my intake tube here rather than just taking out the filter, so that I have more space to work down at the pivot shaft. Okay, so now that we've got the short ram intake out, I can show you exactly what we're working with here. Here's our pivot shaft assembly right down here. We're going to be taking it out from here. There's 4, I believe, bolts. There's 1, 2, 3, and then 4 in the back. You can see just how gross it is down here and how much it's been leaking all over everything. Look at that. It's just caked absolutely everywhere. The next step here is to remove your shift linkages from your pivot shaft assembly here. You've got 1 here and 1 here. A lot of people like using needle nose pliers to pop these off. That's a pretty good thing to do if you don't have any specialized tools. I do a lot of interior work on my car, and this is an upholstery or trim clip remover tool. You see the nice little space in here, and it just happens to work absolutely perfectly for getting these shift linkages off. You just slip it in between, apply a little bit of pressure, and boom, it pops off right there. Same thing with this one. Off we go, done and done. Like I said, if you have needle nose pliers, that'll do. That just works a whole lot better. Now that you've got these off, you can retract them so that you have a little bit more space to work. Same thing with this one, just push it back. This one will spring back into position, but you can just kind of move it out of your way as you need to. Now, I don't know if you can see the way the camera is right now, but down below on the assembly here, you've got 1, 2, there's 3 back here, and where you definitely can't see it, there's a 4th bolt back here. These are all 12 mil bolts, so I'm going to go ahead and remove those now. As you can see, I just took out the back 2 bolts here. So on the back side closest to the fender, you have a nice long bolt here. You can see where the thread locker is on it. But the back side closest to the engine is actually a much shorter bolt that does not have any thread locker. So make sure that you're paying attention to which bolts that you're taking out and where they go back when we go to reassemble. So notice when I was checking out the pivot shaft and how I was going to disassemble this properly, the 2 bolts that are on the engine side that you took out that you have access to immediately, there's one at the front here and one in the back closer to the engine. This is actually the bracket for your up and down linkage where it connects to this. It only goes back in one very specific way. You can't see it very well right now, but I'll take it out so we can make note of it, just so that you can see with your own eyes how this is supposed to go back in. So the linkage will go back in exactly like this, and this is supposed to be in a horizontal position. That's how I took it out. It just got bumped. So when you put this back in, people who have done this job before didn't really make note of it, and they couldn't remember exactly which way it was supposed to go. It does go in horizontally, at least that's how it was when I took it out. So this is how we're going to put it back in. Okay, so next up, there's just one more bolt that actually is for the pivot shaft assembly itself. It was hidden underneath that bracket. It's just the very back side here. Again, we're just going to use our 12 mil on an extension in order to get to it. Now, you can't really see it very well. I wish that I could have a camera in a better spot for you, but I can't. Now, as I'm doing this, I can actually hear the pressure relief here because the breather that's at the front of this assembly right here is so gunked up with oil that it's not doing its job. It is almost exactly why you get all of this leakage out through the seal, because if the breather's all plugged up, it's got nowhere to let anything go, and the pressure builds up and breaks the seal, and then you've got spillage everywhere. Okay guys, the next thing we have to do is actually take out, or at least loosen off, a bolt that goes right into the transmission that the pivot shaft assembly. So you see down here, there are two bolts. There's one way down, and there's this first one right here. Now this top one right here is the one that we're worried about. That is a 14 mil bolt. Again, you can see down here why exactly we're doing this with this gunk sprayed everywhere. So this top bolt here, again, it's a 14 mil. We're gonna remove it completely, and I'll show you that after we get it out. Okay, now that we've got that bolt out, the next thing we have to do is break the seal here. You can see that there's a little bit of gasket that's already in here, adhesive gasket that's comes factory on there, so we have to break that seal. I've got a couple tools here to try doing it. You're just gonna mess around with it until you get it out. Now, as you can see there, all I took was just a big flathead. You can use a pry bar or whatever you need to. I just went in, there's right along the back edge. All I did was just get my flathead in right here, and I pried between this, and it just came right loose. Now that we've got this broken seal here, we can pull the whole assembly just straight out. You may need to mess around with the gear selector here just in order to get it out. That is because there are a couple fins when we get it out that it's gonna catch on. So you'll see here, it won't come out straight like this. It's getting caught. But if I just wiggle it a little bit, it will come out. So now it's free. Try and keep it as straight out as you can. And there we go. Here is your pivot shaft assembly. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty of this very quickly. You will want to just take note of where you took this out. You can actually see from the factory where they've left markings right here to see where it lines up. There's actually markings from here from before. This is probably where somebody has already replaced the seal once before, but since my car has 150,000 kilometers on it now, it's probably not the only time this thing has been replaced. So clearly somebody has already done this before. Now I'm just gonna show you guys here where all this crap is built up in here, all of this stuff in here. Before I put everything back together, just for my own sanity, I'm gonna just clean everything out here before I put everything back. There's no reason not to clean it when everything's nice and open and you can reach everything nice and easy. You can see I've also plugged the intakes so that when I use my compressor here to blow all the stuff out before I use just some soapy water or all-purpose cleaner, I'm just gonna blast everything out that I can, spray it down with the cleaner, let it sit for a while, let it get into the oil and the grease, and then just wipe up as much of it as I can. Okay, so here we go. Here is our pivot shaft assembly. Here's the bracket that we took off earlier. You can see how disgusting these things are. Nice and clean on the inside of the pivot shaft though. This is the bolt that we took out earlier that I said it has a pin on the end. When it's on the back of the side of the transmission, this is actually where it goes. So this is actually how it guides your selector on your pivot shaft. That's why we have to take that out or else it wouldn't come out. So first thing we're gonna do here is just spray this thing down, get it cleaned up a little bit before we start marking off where everything is before we take it apart with our paint pen, which I have somewhere around here. Yeah, so let's just get to cleaning this thing up. Here, just use some brake cleaner because honestly, on the inside at least here. I don't want to spray this onto the boot because brake cleaner and boots and anything rubber or vinyl or anything, they don't exactly go hand in hand. So I'm just going to use the brake cleaner to clean off the inside parts here because there's nothing in here that's rubber that I need to worry about except for the seal, which of course is already broken. All right, now that this is pretty dry and clean and clear of oil so we can do our markings, I'm actually gonna clean up the top of this here. I'm gonna grab my compressor and just blast as much of this off as I can, and also to help loosen up of the oil. And then I'll use some brake clean on a rag and then just rub that all around on the actual metallic parts. Okay guys, now we're gonna get down to the nitty gritty. We can actually fix everything that is wrong with this so far. So here we have our parts straight from Mazda. This is the only place you can get them as far as I know. Here's your replacement seal, here's a replacement bearing, and here's your replacement breather. Now I'll send a picture of all of the different part numbers. That'll be coming up in just a second in the video after I'm done showing you this part, so that if you need to get those parts, you can just go to your local Mazda dealer and order them yourself with just the part numbers. Be everything that you need. A lot of people will just replace the seal because really this is the culprit. This is what needs to be replaced the most. The bearing and the breather are optional. For me, obviously the breather was gummed up earlier. You could tell from when I was relieving the pressure, taking this assembly out. So clearly the breather needs to be replaced anyway. As you can tell, it's in pretty bad shape as it is. So now that we've got everything all cleaned up, the next step that we need to do is remove this cotter pin that's in this assembly right here. It's right here. Now the only problem is that the other side of the cotter pin is here because it goes straight through the shaft. So if you try and punch it through, you're gonna end up hitting this. So what we need to do is get this at just the right angle so that the cotter pin has space to come out. Now, if we did it like this, it would probably hit the backside here. So all I really need to do is just prop this up a bit, right about there. So I'm just gonna use a chisel or a punch just to place that down so that I can see I have clearance to get this thing out. And I'm pretty sure that this is a 3/16 punch. 3/16 I think is the size that you're supposed to use. It feels a little bit too small to me. I'm gonna use one that's just one size up in my chisel set to punch this cotter pin out. Yeah, we'll switch to the smaller size now because it did taper a little bit. So I almost forgot just here, not paying attention to myself, that we have a paint pen. Paint pen, very important so you can get everything back together all in the right spot. You can see where there's a mark here already, but we're gonna put it all straight down the line here with my paint pen so I know exactly how to line it up when we get it back together. Just like that. All right, let's get the rest of this cotter pin out. Here we go, do not lose this. Obviously very important. Put this somewhere it's not gonna roll away. Now that that's out, we can pull it straight off. Once again though, just to be sure, because of course, you can obviously tell that this is, it's geared. So I'm gonna take a little bit of paint again, make sure that this lines up. So that we know that when we put it back on, because this is the this piece right here is the one that has the actual gearing on it as well. So when I put it back on, at least I know that this is the side that's supposed to go here, because obviously it can only go this way or 180. It probably won't fit the other way, but just to be sure, we're marking it off so that we get it the right way when we put it back together. So you just slide it off. These two pieces come apart. They only go back in one way together anyway, so you don't have to worry about putting these, putting any markings on this at all. You can see on the inside here where it's geared as well. So we'll just leave this together for now. Set it off to the side. Now what we really want to get to is this right here. So here is our broken seal. So we're just gonna pull this out. There we go. there's our busted seal. It's causing all that disgusting mess in the engine bay. So we just pull that out. I'm just gonna take a rag and clean out the oil from inside of here. Just underneath the seal is the bearing. Right in here, you can actually see the ball bearings on the inside. There it is on the bottom as well. There's your bearing. So I'm sure that this bearing is totally fine, but if I have this thing apart, I might as well take the whole thing apart, take and replace everything that has to do with the seal assembly and fix it. So in order to get the bearing out, all I'm gonna do, actually I should probably get the breather off first just so that I have a flat surface to work on to punch the bearing out. The breather, as you can see, it's just a press fit. Same thing on the new one. This is just a press fit. That's all it is. So all I'm gonna do is get something, probably this guy right here, and punch this out. There we go. So we'll wait to put the breather in, obviously, after, so that we can get this bearing out first. So we're gonna punch it out this way, so that when we put the new one in, we'll put it back in this way. Now I'm pretty sure if I read it properly online that it's a 19 mil, fits perfectly around it. I can actually just test that right here, because here is the new bearing, so that is a perfect fit. So we're just gonna punch that in here. And there we go. Nice and shiny like it was brand new. Also, you can tell I took off all of the gasket right here because we'll be putting new gasket on with our gasket maker when we reassemble. So now that this is all nice and clean, it's time to clean out the inside here, get a little bit of grease on this bearing and pop it back in. Okay, bearing goes back in through the bottom, same way that it came out in the first place. There, that looks a little bit better. As you can see on the inside here, there's that little lip and it is much closer. That's about where the old one was anyway. And on the back side of it, it's inset just a tiny little bit. So that's pretty much perfect where the old one was. We'll leave it exactly like this. So the next thing that we have to do is put the seal back inside. It does go back in so that the open end right here is facing down into the assembly. The flat side is the facing up, so it goes in just like this. You saw it from before when we pulled it out. All we did was just pry it out. Obviously it's not a super tight fit, but we just press it in with our hands. Now, I'm not using grease or oil on this because if there's grease and oil between the seal and the outside here of the assembly, then obviously that's gonna create a gap that could eventually just leak the oil out anyway. So you want to make sure that the inside before you put the seal back in is nice and clean and dry. I'm just using my finger, my thumbnail here to push it back in all the way down. And there we go. There's our seal intact. Bearing is in. Last thing that we need to do is just reinstall the breather. And that is easily done. I say that without having done it before. Right here, I believe a 13 mil will fit right over top, but it's enough to catch on the base right here. And as you saw before, it's just a press fit. So all we're gonna do again is, without any grease or oil or anything, we're gonna put this right here. We're gonna take our 13 mil right over top, and without jumbling up the table for the millionth time, I'll try and do this in the air. And there we go. Breather in. No gap right here at all. Nice and press fit, flush at the bottom. So new bearing, new breather, new seal, nice and clean up on the top like it's brand new. Perfect, ready to go. We're gonna start reassembling this in just a second. Okay guys, so now this is a totally optional step. Obviously, you don't have to do this. This is just something that I like to do. I mean, I've got everything apart already. This is looking brand new and shiny and very clean, and I like things to be nice and clean, especially because if this seal starts to go again for whatever reason in 20, 30, 50, 100,000 kilometers and more driving, I'm not really gonna know if it's failing again, if I can't see that there's buildup and everything on everything, if everything looks like this or like this did before I clean it up. So all I'm gonna do now is just clean everything up. I'm gonna Dremel it with the wire again just to make it all look like this, so that when it gets put back together in the engine bay, it looks nice and clean. Now to do that again, all I'm gonna do is just an all-purpose cleaner, or you can use dish soap and some water if you want. Brake clean on any parts is really good, especially for stuff like this metal. It just eats right through all the oil and grease and makes cleanup a whole lot easier. Just gonna spray it down, clean it up, wipe it down, brush it off, and do what I need to do to make this looking like this. Okay everybody, we are back with all of our nice clean parts here. We've got the top that I already showed you how we assembled. This is looking a whole lot better than it did before, and the top of this is also looking spick and span. I just put the boot back on here on the top side, just for now. So the first thing we have to do, of course, is put it right back into the top part of the assembly, and then snug up the boot over top. Get rid of these little bubbles here. There we go. Nice and clean. Now, next thing that we have to do, of course, is put this assembly back together. They go in like this. We'll again match up our red marks here. There they are there. And all you have to do is just slide it right back onto the shaft. You don't have to worry about oiling this right now. If it makes it easier for you, then sure. But it's not necessary, just because when it gets back into the transmission, it's gonna have all the oil from that anyway, so no worries there. So here's our red mark on our shaft. Now, when I was messing around with this earlier, here's our red mark on the top piece of the assembly right here. Now, if we leave this lined up as it is, if we put this on this side, for example, of the red line, I'll show you why marking off matters. So here's our bottom piece. We'll put the shaft back in so that it lines up. Everything is nice and lined up with the reds here. It's got to get through the bottom. So here we are here. So now, if we get all the way to the top, there we go. All of our red marks are lined up. Everything is a-okay. We are good. If this top piece here was swung around so that the back piece was farther over to this side of the shaft, the top piece would not be able to line up because it would get caught against this piece right here. So this is why marking stuff off before you start the job is much, much more important than you might think it is, because it just will not operate correctly. It won't go back together like it should. That's it for this assembly, at least. That's pretty much it. So now we're just gonna have to put the cotter pin back in, which is nice and simple, and I'll just get to that right now. And there we go. There we have it. Cotter pin's nice and flush. All of the red marks line up where they should. Here's your cotter pin. There's no... On the back side here, you can see that it's actually inset a tiny little bit, and there's space there. So what I'm gonna do is just take the punch and inset it on this side just a tiny bit. Even though it's flush right now, it's better be safe than sorry. You don't want it catching on anything, just in case. All right, so here we go. now that that's done. So it's inset a little bit here. On the opposite side, you can see that it's just under flush over here too, so there's perfect fit. Everything nice and clean. Here's your pivot shaft assembly all back together, ready to go back into the car. Hey everybody, here we are back in the engine bay. So I cleaned up around here, as you can see from earlier that I said I was going to do. I just did that while the camera wasn't rolling. I cleaned up all of the gasket that was here, or at least as much as I could. There's still a little bit left over, but I can just use my fingers to get rid of that. We want this surface to be nice and clean and dry before we put on our new gasket that we have here. This stuff is just Permatex. You can get it almost at any auto store or home improvement store. This stuff is black gasket maker. It says high flex. It also said on the package that it was very oil resistant, and considering the whole point of this is to not leak oil, I figured this was a good call. So let's take all of our paper towel out. There we go. What we're gonna do now is just apply our gasket maker. You don't need a whole ton because it spreads out really well, especially since it's going to be a nice flush mounting surface. It'll spread out really, really good. We don't want too much on here. It's just to make a good seal so that the oil doesn't get around. There we go. That's all done. So now we can just put our assembly right back in exactly the same way it came out. You'll want this part, of course, right here to be facing the front, and this part, I mean, it only goes in one way, so it's pretty easy to tell. So we'll just slide it back in here. There we go, caught right there. And now you don't want to force anything here, because if you force it, then you're probably doing something wrong, or it's got caught on something that it's not supposed to get caught on. So you want it to sit flush. There we go. See, I didn't do anything. I didn't force it down. All I did was just move the shaft around with the shifter plate right here. Even if you have a stock one, doesn't matter. Just move it back and forth until it sits down naturally. You do not want to force anything. You don't want to break anything inside the assembly or inside the transmission. It will go down. You just have to jiggle it. And as you can see, it's a nice clean fit right here all the way around. So all I'm going to do now is get my bolts and put in the 4 that I can access currently. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll clean up the edge of the gasket maker with some paper towel, and then we'll get to hooking everything back up. Okay, that's all 4 bolts, all nice and tight. I don't know if you could tell from the time lapse or not, but obviously I did opposite corners just to make sure that it torques down evenly across the whole plate. I just wiped up the extra gasket that came out, that got squished down. So now the next thing to do is simply put our bracket back on. Oh crap, see, this is what happens when you forget to do stuff. So I have to take this back. I have to take this bolt out now because I forgot that it has to go through this plate as well. Yeah, so we'll do that now. So a note on putting this one back in, just like I showed you guys before, it came out like this, and this was horizontal as well, so we want to keep it the exact same way. This piece right here actually rides against a part of the shaft that you can't really see. It's a rounded piece right here. Before I put this in, I'm just going to put some grease on that inside of the shaft right here, just so that it's not dry here and dry there, because you do want this to glide easily along the shaft assembly as you're shifting. So I'm just going to take some of my grease and put it right in here. It won't hurt if you put on a little bit too much. It's just grease. It's not like it's gonna leak everywhere. It's only gonna get used in the spot that it's meant for. All right, so let's put this plate back in properly this time without adding bolts that shouldn't be there. There we go. That goes in here. That fits up just nicely. And I'll show you a close-up of where that that black plastic piece fits along the shaft and why I grease that up once I get these two bolts back in. Okay, we've got all of our bolts back in now. Our bracket is back in place. We've greased up our slider for our pivot shaft. And so now the last thing that I'm gonna do is just reconnect the shifter linkages, which again is super simple. You literally just push it back on. Same with this one. They go on a heck of a lot easier than they come off, I'll tell you that. But now you can see that it's working exactly as it should. There's no problems with anything. I'll go back in the car and I'll keep the camera rolling on this after everything's completely done, just so you can see the operation here. Of course, we cannot forget our selector pin bolt. Again, it's a 14 millimeter, and I showed you before where it goes. It's just in the top bolt of the transmission where the shifter linkage, or the pivot shaft is. Now, there might be torque spec for a lot of this stuff, but honestly, I don't know what they are. I didn't bother looking them up because the bolts were fairly easy to come out, so I pretty much knew that as soon as when I put them back in, you just make them snug, and then usually another like quarter turn or so, and that should be good. You don't want to put too much pressure on it, of course. You don't want to snap any bolts. It's as long as you have a good seal and everything's nice and tight, you should be good to go. So. Okay, so now I'm just gonna run through the gears in the card just to make sure that everything is good. We'll do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and reverse. Feels really good. Feels a heck of a lot better than it did before. I know that it's hard to tell. I mean, all I did was really change a seal, so you wouldn't think that would make a difference, but the biggest difference for me was actually just modifying where my short shifter plate was here. If you have a JBR short shifter, then this piece right here is actually adjustable. You can change where this pin is located, and obviously it makes a big difference. This is exactly why it's adjustable, because it makes a difference for where your shift linkage is. So if you find that you're catching, if your transition from second to third gear is not actually the greatest, then probably all you have to do is make a very small adjustment on where this pin is located for your shift linkage, and it will make it a whole lot smoother. All I did, you can kind of see where it was before here, where the marks were. That's maybe a quarter of an inch. It's more like an eighth of an inch that I moved it in from before. And honestly, it already feels a heck of a lot better. And knowing that this is all sealed up properly now, and there's not gonna be any leakage, so that I can clean up the rest of my engine bay later on when the weather's great, makes me feel a heck of a lot better. Well, everybody, that's it for this episode for Garage North. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, ring that bell. It means a lot to us. If you want to see us do something on our cars, leave us a comment. Always, you can check us out at garagenorth.ca too. It's always an option. Again, thank you so much for watching. Catch you later.